All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started with our first screencast on the progressive era. So we kind of introduced it in class as far as the different facets of the progressive era and the different people who are trying to reform. So you have the social gospelers, you have the muckrakers, you have the socialists, you have the labor unions. There's a lot of different people who are trying to reform American society. So what we're going to focus on are the issues that they tried to fix within America. And there's a few things I want you guys to think about as we go through the different topics of reform here. So one, what is their goal as a reform movement? Two, a lot of the areas that they're trying to fix, we saw an earlier wave of reformers try and fix the same issue, which was the antebellum reform movement. So I want you to try and do a comparison between the progressive era reformers and these earlier antebellum reformers. And the last thing I want you to look at is um, how does it link to us? How does it link to the present? What are some similarities and some lasting effects of these reform movements on American society in general? So we're going to try and look at really four big areas. I left one off here. So we're going to try and look at settlement houses, public education, factory reform, and the last one that's not listed here is prohibition. So it's kind of a lengthy screencast with a lot of topics, so it's going to be dense with information. I might not get to finish it all, so we might have to make a second screencast to kind of wrap up these topics. So we'll see how far I'm able to get. So we're going to jump right into it and start with these things called settlement houses. So what you're looking at here is the original settlement house, which is a place called Hull House, which was in Chicago, and it was built in 1889. And the founder, you're also looking at her picture here. Her name is Jane Addams, and the whole idea of a settlement house is it's really a community center to offer services and facilities to these poor people in these urban slums who are mostly immigrants to try and offer them uh, all different types of services. So when I think about settlement houses, what I like to think about is kind of a modern day equivalent of it, which is the YMCA. It's a settlement house goes much beyond what a YMCA would do today, but the concept is the same thing. Is kind of offering facilities to young people, to women, to teach them how to do things. So a settlement house would offer classes. It might give medical treatment. It would try and help people to better themselves. So originally, the settlement houses they have a religious connotation to them, and Jane Addams kind of says that uh, you know bringing like these Protestant values will kind of help the immigrants to better themselves. But most of so like these settlement houses get replicated. So the original one is in Chicago, but it gets replicated all around the country in different cities. And so ultimately, uh, they end up being very secular institutions because of what we talked about in class. The immigrants are mostly Catholics and the Italians, and Jewish and the Eastern Europeans, and so like pushing this Protestant evangelical ideology and kind of bringing this kind of it makes them resistant to come to these settlement houses and these community centers to get the help that they might need, whether it be educational help or medical treatment or help with childcare that they might want. And so a lot of the settlement houses kind of detach themselves from the religious ideology and kind of focus more on just on the services that they can provide for the community. So some things I just want to show you guys some pictures of the settlement houses. So this is like an art class that the kids are taking within the settlement house. This is like just some a playground area that they set up. This is again Hull House in Chicago, a library that they set up for the kids. They tried to offer all these kinds of services uh, for the individuals. Now, what ended up happening here is that the settlement house kind of spurs urban reform in a lot of different areas. So I think different than earlier reform movements is that what a lot of the settlement workers who are again women, just like earlier on, middle class women who are coming down to try and fix and reform American society, not too different from that whole idea of the cult of domesticity, where it's a women kind of like branched out and took their idea of like reforming and molding their family and kind of molding American society, an extension of that. Uh, I think a difference here is that they no longer see the person itself as the problem. What they start to see is that the surrounding area is a bigger problem. It's not that the people are causing their own poverty and their own problems, it's the environment that they're living in. So the settlement houses start to spur kind of urban reform in general to try and fix problems that they see as like destroying these people's neighborhoods and these people's lives. So it branches out into a few areas. The first area is just to fix where they live because they live in these awful conditions. So the first tenement law that you see passed is going to be in 1901, right here in New York City. And what this really does is it abolishes some of the things we talked about in class. So it makes it illegal. It creates building codes for the tenements. So like for example, we talked a little bit about the style of the tenements and those interior apartments. So it makes those things illegal. And the famous kinds of apartments they used to have are called dumbbell tenements. This is where you used to have like those interior apartments, families living in very crowded spaces. So it makes them have to follow these different laws and rules. And you can see here, these are some people who are tenement inspectors. So you can look at this as a typical tenement room, and you can just see kind of the overcrowdedness and the filth and um, various building code violations that they're dealing with at this time. And so they tried to fix this stuff, and this started to become commonplace across not just New York City, but across the country to kind of eliminate and get rid of these tenements to improve life and improve living conditions for these poorer people. Other things that you see kind of make its way onto the stage for the first time are sanitation units. So you, for the first time, see um, like organized government pickup of garbage, which never took place before. Um, and so you see the government kind of stepping in and regulating and taking some role in keeping their city safe and secure. The other thing that you see develop here is, I think interesting, is a place for people, for kids to go play. So I showed you the picture on your, I guess it would be on your right, with the kids playing in the street in class. And that's, I believe, a Jacob Riis picture or a Lewis Hines picture. But on the left-hand side, they started to make playgrounds all throughout different cities, and this is New York City specifically. And always in a city, it's kind of like, well, where do we put a playground? There's no space for it. So they were very creative. Like this one that you're looking at here is a rooftop playground. So they used to put playgrounds on the tops of the tenements. Found spaces for these things so that kids would have a place to play and kind of trying to improve just the city environment in general. All right, the second big area that we're going to take a look at is public education and kind of like what was going on in schools at the time and how are they trying to improve public education. And what were they using public schools for and how does this fit into the progressive era reforms. So the first area of public school reform that I think is important is they try to use public school as a means to assimilate the Eastern European and the Southern Europeans into American society. And they wanted to get them to be a part of American society through school. So they would try and teach them the values of American society and try and get them from an early age. So this is when you see mandatory kindergartens or the development of kindergartens, mandatory attendance for a lot of the grades. So like kindergarten, for example, they want to try and get the kids away from their parents really as soon as possible so that they could Americanize them, so they could teach them American values. They thought that they were um, retaining their foreign values in the tenements, and this was their chance to kind of educate them and bring them into American society. So it's a method of assimilation. I think is very interesting here in public education. Now I want to show you guys some photos because I think it's very interesting. Like this is an adult education class from Philadelphia, and they're kind of pledging their allegiance to the flag. So we know like you put your hand over your heart when you pledge allegiance to the flag. They had different things that they would do. So they're pledging allegiance to the flag. Here, these are kids pledging allegiance to the flag in a different style in 1899. So this is the creation of this whole, I guess, patriotism within the school system. And we've seen this before when we talked about the reservation schools that they brought the American Indians to try and assimilate and Americanize them. So it's not the first time, but it's another example of trying to do this. And your big leader here in this movement is going to be a guy named John Dewey, and he writes books about how to improve the American education system. And so you get more professional training for American educators. Um, School boards are created. More specific curriculums for different grades are created. I think another big change and development in education is that they start to create what's called vocational schools in America, all throughout the American educational system. And vocational schools are different than the high school that you go to. A vocational school would be you're trying to learn a trade or a practice. So you might go to school for electricity, or you might go to school for carpentry, or printing, or plumbing, or some kind of trade. Was built into the American school system at this time. Now, in your era, we kind of like went the opposite direction. We took these vocational educational um, avenues out, and you're starting to see them come back in a little bit in American education. But during this era, like the turn of the century, they thought that vocational education, and particularly they were kind of targeting this towards immigrants, um, was a good way to try and give them an opportunity at a good life, at a good job. And hopefully you see a connection. We talked about this once before when we did the Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois debates. And Booker T. Washington said, like, hey, this is the best way for African Americans to improve themselves in the South is to go for vocational education. And you see kind of a resurfacing of this, or just in a different way up north with John Dewey and some of the other educational reformers to focus on vocational training for these immigrants to improve their lives and improve their status. Um, I thought you guys would find this interesting too. Like as a side fact, the Pledge of Allegiance started to become part of American schools in this era. So you do see a heavy patriotic tint to American schools during the era, and it has to do with trying to Americanize the immigrants of the era. All right, we're going to take a look at factory reform a little bit, kind of briefly. So factory reform, it's going to focus on two big areas: children and women. And the group that they're going to leave out of really making federal laws and passing laws to protect are going to be men. And so we're going to talk about why that is. So the first area that really gains national attention is going to be the child labor issue that we discussed in class. And so by the early 1900s, by about 1915, almost every single state has passed a child labor law restricting the age of which children can work. And it varied from state to state, from not allowing children under 12 to work to not allowing children under 14 to work. So yeah, it varied, but basically every state was trying to regulate it and not allow children to work. And it caught some resistance from different groups. Um, you know, some people or some individuals, let's say some working parents wanted their children to work or they needed their children to work. Big business owners are going to resist it because it's a source of labor for them, a cheap source of labor. So you do have resistance, but basically every state is able to pass some kind of law to get this changed. Um, a law that's passed that's kind of weak, but it just shows you that they're moving in kind of a direction of trying to stop child labor totally. Is you have the Keaton-Owens Act, which basically prohibited interstate trade on anything that was produced by a child, was created by child labor. So it's trying to stop child labor from being a growing problem. So they're relatively effective in curtailing child labor in America in the early 1900s. The other area that they're going to focus on are women. And so they do pass a lot of like laws helping women. I think one of the events that helps this to happen is this famous uh, factory fire, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which happens in 1911. So what happens here is that this had numerous building violations, and what they would do is lock the doors so that women couldn't get out. There's a lot of women working in the factory. And they had a fire here, and they were up on, I believe, the 11th or 12th floor of this building, and they had a massive fire, and you had hundreds of people, about 150 people die in the fire. Um, and so this kind of facilitates some changes to factory life, and women get like a maximum amount of work hours, a minimum wage women are going to get. Now, what you don't see is men do not get the same